When people talk about losing themselves, they usually mean something dramatic. A breakdown, a public failure, a moment that can be explained. What they don't talk about is the quieter version, the one where nothing collapses. It simply stops holding meaning. For a long time, I believed my life was stable because it was structured. Now, I see it was structured because I was afraid of emptiness. Structure gave me language, titles, schedules, responsibilities. They told me who I was without requiring me to ask. The first thing I lost wasn't motivation. It was identification. One day, someone asked what I did, the most ordinary question in the world, and my answer felt borrowed. I said the words. They sounded correct, but they didn't belong to me anymore. That moment passed unnoticed by everyone else. But inside, something fractured. Not loudly, not painfully, just enough to let cold air in. I began to feel like a placeholder in my own life. Present, but interchangeable. Competent, but unnecessary. I could be replaced, not just at work, but in the narrative of my own existence, and nothing essential would change. That thought followed me everywhere. I watched how easily people introduced themselves, how naturally they occupied their roles. I'm a manager. I'm a parent. I'm an artist. Each sentence sounded like shelter. Mine felt like performance. At night, lying awake, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If all the roles disappeared tomorrow, who would remain? The silence that followed was absolute. I tried to ignore it, doubled down on routine, added productivity where doubt appeared. But the emptiness wasn't impressed. It waited. Soon, even success felt irrelevant. Achievements arrived and left without touching me. Praise landed and slid off. Failure didn't hurt either. Emotion had flattened. Not numb, distant. Like watching my life through thick glass. I realized then that I wasn't depressed. I was undefined, and that terrified me more. One afternoon, I cleared my calendar without explanation. Not because I had somewhere to go, because I needed to feel what happened when I stopped being expected. The answer arrived quickly. Nothing happened, and that was devastating. Without appointments, days lost their shape. Morning bled into afternoon. Afternoon dissolved into evening. Time stopped asking for justification. And without justification, I felt exposed. I noticed how much of my identity had been external. Who needed me? Who depended on me? Who expected consistency? When those demands paused, I felt myself thinning, as if I only existed when observed. I walked through the city and felt invisible. Not unseen, irrelevant. The world didn't resist my absence. It absorbed it. At a cafe, I overheard a conversation about ambition, about building something. The phrase felt foreign. What was I building exactly? A life that functioned, a self that performed. Neither felt real. I began writing not to create, but to inventory. What remained when I stripped away utility? Preferences surfaced, not passions, not dreams, simple truths. I liked walking without purpose, that I disliked being rushed, that I felt calmer in silence than in conversation. These were not identities, but they were real. Still, something was missing. A center, a reason to choose one day over another. That was when the invitation came. Not exciting, not urgent, just unexpected. A message from someone I barely knew. A few of us are leaving town for a while. No plans, no expectations. Just space. You can come if you want. I stared at the message longer than necessary. My first instinct was refusal. I had no role there, no function, no explanation. Exactly why it unsettled me. I imagined going, and felt fear, not of danger, but of exposure. Who would I be if no one knew what to call me? That night, I stood in front of the mirror and realized something quietly devastating. I had mistaken being useful for being alive. The thought followed me into sleep, into dreams, into waking. I saw how often I had chosen roles because they protected me from ambiguity, for not knowing, from having to define myself from the inside out. In the morning, the message was still there, unanswered, waiting without pressure. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, paused. For the first time in years, The question wasn't, what should I do? It was, who will I become if I stop doing? The fear wasn't loud. It was precise, sharp, honest. And I knew, with a certainty that didn't require courage, that avoiding it would cost me something I couldn't name yet. I didn't send a message that morning, but I didn't delete it either. And that was enough to mark the beginning of something irreversible. Some losses announce themselves. Others arrive as vacancies. This was the latter, and I was only just beginning to understand what it would ask of me. I eventually sent the message. Not with enthusiasm, not with certainty, just with honesty. I don't know who I'll be there, I wrote, but I think I need to find out. The reply came quickly. You don't have to be anything, it said. That sentence frightened me more than rejection ever could. Leaving didn't feel dramatic. There was no farewell speech, no symbolic closing of doors. I packed lightly, not because I was disciplined, but because I didn't know what version of myself would arrive. Taking too much felt dishonest. The journey itself was quiet. Long stretches of road. No destination worth narrating. Just movement without achievement. For the first time, travel didn't feel like escape. It felt like subtraction. When we arrived, the place was unremarkable. Not beautiful. Not inspiring. Just open. A small cluster of buildings near nothing in particular. No schedule posted. No expectations outlined. No one asked what I did. That absence felt heavier than any demand. The first few days were unbearable. Without structure, time expanded painfully. Mornings arrived without purpose. Meals happened without urgency. Conversation drifted without agenda. I felt useless. And underneath that, afraid. I realized how deeply my sense of worth had been tied to being needed. Here, no one needed me. No one relied on my competence. No one cared whether I was impressive. At first, that felt like erasure. I tried to invent tasks, clean things that weren't dirty, organize objects that didn't require order, offer help where none was asked. It was transparent and quietly embarrassing. One evening, someone noticed. You don't have to earn your place here, they said gently. I nodded, but my body didn't believe them. At night, sleep came unevenly. Dreams arrived without metaphor. Just fragments. Unfinished conversations. Faces without context. Roles dissolving mid-sentence. I woke often, heart racing, unsure why. During the day I walked, not to clear my mind, too exhausted, but the thoughts followed. Persistent, uninterested in distraction. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I'm not performing coherence? The questions no longer felt philosophical. They felt urgent. I noticed how uncomfortable silence made me. Not empty silence. Unwitnessed silence. The kind where nothing is required and nothing is reflected back. It stripped me of reference. One afternoon, I sat alone for hours doing nothing. No phone, no book, no intention. At first, my thoughts screamed. Then they slowed. Then something unexpected happened. They stopped trying to justify my existence. In that stillness, I felt something raw. Not peace. Vulnerability. Without roles, I was unprotected. Without purpose, I was exposed. Without narrative, I was simply present. That night, I admitted something out loud. I don't know how to exist without usefulness. The words echoed. No one answered. And that was the point. Over time, small truths emerged. Not insights. Sensations. I noticed what tired me. What steadied me. What felt false. What felt tolerable. This was not identity, but it was information. I began to understand that identity isn't discovered. It's constructed, often defensively, and I had built mine like armor. Effective, heavy, unremovable without pain. One day, while sitting with others, someone asked a simple question. What do you miss? I opened my mouth and stopped. I didn't miss work. I didn't miss recognition. I didn't miss structure. What I missed was permission. To be unformed. That realization hurt. Because I understood then how rarely I had allowed myself that freedom. Even as a child. Even before responsibility had names. As days passed, the anxiety shifted. It didn't disappear. It matured. It stopped demanding resolution. Started asking for honesty. I stopped trying to define myself, stopped rehearsing explanations. When asked who I was, I answered simply, I'm here. The simplicity felt radical. One morning, I woke without dread. Not joy, just neutrality. And that felt like progress. I began to see how much of my previous life had been about anticipation. Waiting for weekends, waiting for breaks, waiting for relief. Here, there was nothing to wait for. And slowly, I stopped bracing myself against time. But freedom revealed its edge. Without direction, days risked dissolving. Without commitment, meaning thinned. I understood then why people cling to obligation. It gives weight. I stood one evening at the edge of the property and felt a question rise, calm, unavoidable. What will I choose to carry forward? Not roles, not titles, but responsibility. Because living without identity is not sustainable. And living with borrowed identity is not honest. Something would need to be built. But this time, consciously, I realized this place was not an ending. It was a clearing, and clearings are dangerous. They force decisions. That night, I wrote a list, not of what I wanted to be, but of what I refused to become again. Someone absent from their own life, someone defined only by function, someone who confuses safety with truth. I folded the paper, put away, and understood that the hardest part was still ahead. Not losing my old self, but choosing what would replace it. The silence no longer scared me, but it no longer protected me either. It waited. Leaving the clearing felt heavier than arriving. Not because I was attached to the place, but because I was no longer protected by not choosing. There comes a point, after enough silence, when freedom stops feeling expansive and starts feeling demanding. It asks a question you can't postpone. What will you commit to now, knowing it will shape you? I didn't return with answers. I returned with boundaries. And that, I learned, was enough to begin. The world I came back to hadn't changed. It rarely does. But I had, not in ways that were visible, in ways that made pretending impossible. People noticed, not immediately, but eventually. You seem harder to place, someone said. I took it as a compliment. I stopped explaining myself, not out of secrecy, out of precision. I learned that clarity does not require justification. I declined things without apology, accepted others without enthusiasm, chose slowly, spoke less, listened more, not to people, but to resistance. If something required me to abandon myself, I noticed that was new. I rebuilt my days intentionally, not full, not impressive, just honest. Enough work to stay engaged, enough solitude to stay intact, enough connection to stay human. Anything beyond that felt excessive. I didn't search for purpose. I practiced alignment. Purpose, I learned, is often a byproduct, not a destination. Some relationships dissolved, not dramatically, quietly. They had been sustained by versions of me that no longer existed. Letting them go felt like grief without regret. Others deepened, not because of history, because of presence. I spoke without rehearsing, listened without preparing responses. That changed everything. Fear still visited, but it no longer disguised itself as logic. I could tell the difference now. Fear asked me to preserve comfort. Integrity asked me to remain awake. I stopped asking who I was, started asking how I wanted to relate to what was in front of me. The shift was subtle. It was everything. There were days I missed the old armor, the predictability, the safety of being needed, but I never missed being invisible to myself. One afternoon, sitting alone, I realized something quietly profound. I was no longer trying to become someone. I was trying to stay present with who I already was. That effort felt sustainable. I understood then that identity is not something you possess. It's something you enact, repeatedly, consciously, and revise when it no longer fits. This didn't make life easier. It made it truer. I stopped measuring success by outcome, started measuring it by coherence. Did my actions match my values? Did my time reflect my priorities? Did my silence feel chosen or avoided? These questions replaced ambition. I don't offer this story as a solution. There is no formula here, only a warning and an invitation. The warning: if you don't choose your life deliberately, something else will choose it for you. Convenience, expectation, fear. The invitation: you are allowed to exist without a label. You are allowed to change without explanation. You are allowed to build slowly, even in a world addicted to speed. I still live without certainty, but I no longer live without consent. And that distinction changed everything. Some nights, I still feel the pull of old roles, the comfort of being defined. When that happens, I return to the simplest truth I know. A life that requires your disappearance is too expensive. I didn't find myself. I stopped abandoning myself. That was enough. If you're standing in the space where nothing defines you yet, stay. Don't rush to fill it. Let it teach you what you refuse to carry forward. Because the most dangerous identity is the one you never chose. And the most honest life is the one you keep choosing, quietly, daily, without applause.